So I am back. I can record now. If I just click the link in Outlook, it doesn't recognize me as the leader of the call. So I should know that by now. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Let me share my screen. I'm going to start this class off as normal with a little recap of the reading, the stuff that's not as exciting to discuss. And then we will introduce Sarah, my past PhD advisor, who I'm very happy to have here. So let me bring that up. And of course, to get into the Zoom meeting, I closed my slides off. So what is this? Here we go. Okay, here we go. So welcome everyone. I'm going to maximize this and we'll talk about a little recap. So this is the fun part. This is, you've got your paper submitted. You got through like the 9 circles of submission process, you know, or 7 circles, and you got through the gatekeepers, and the review team is actually going to look at your work, other experts from your field, either known to you or unknown, and give you some critical feedback and hopefully constructive feedback on your work and how it was delivered and how it was conveyed to the public. This can be exciting. This can be a little nerve-wracking, painful at times, but we're going to start talking about the various levels of review and who's all looking at it and the folks that are working behind the scenes, so you know who to contact if you have questions or concerns. And then we'll talk about why some people will get rejected when they submit their papers and some reasons for that and what the strategies are if that happens to you, unfortunately. And then we will kind of talk about proofs and the madness that is that, and the 2-day turnarounds that they often give you. And then we will open it up for our questions after we kind of introduce Sarah to the group. So I used to work at the International Society of Arboriculture, and I was a managing editor, one of 2, and I'm trying to get the other managing editor for urban forestry and arboriculture and urban forestry on a call to talk about grammar, because he was kind of the grammar police when we were there. But I kind of worked with just getting submissions in. So a managing editor is probably not the subject matter expert. They just know how journal and scientific writing is supposed to be. They have an idea of the scope of the journal, and if it's a journal about trees, and you have an article about birds or something, you know, ornithology paper, they will be able to be like, okay, this is probably not a fit, and then, you know, kick it back to you before you waste too much time finding it out from the reviewers, right? A big thing is, you know, a lot of journals are in English languages, and a lot of researchers are from everywhere, you know, and so these editors will often look at English language and see if it's easy to read, because, you know, there are nuances when you translate from one language to another, and structural differences that make it sometimes hard for like a direct translation to work. And if there's issues with that, they will probably suggest that you go to an editor that is skilled at kind of streamlining those kind of issues, right? And that is a service to you, because if your paper doesn't read well, even though you're doing what most of us can't do in writing in a second language, it will be judged poorly by the reviewers, and it just won't go well, unfortunately. And your message will be lost, even if you have the greatest data in the world. Some reviewer is going to pick at that, unfortunately, and so you want to address that. And these reviewer services, I'll show you one that I use. They're actually not too expensive. Nothing you should pay for. Your advisor should be the one footing the bill. So sometimes they have strict formatting requirements. I just submitted to a journal, an MDPI journal called Sustainability. They have their own template, including one thing I really kind of hate is those numbered references, you know, but you know, they will check those type of things, and depending on how serious they are about it, they may kick it back to that. And then once it gets past all those things and all the check boxes are, saying that this has not been submitted somewhere else and all that have been cleared, they will move it on to the editor-in-chief, who is the subject matter expert, who's in charge of all the scientific content of the journal. So, when it gets, so the editor is the person who's kind of the main gatekeeper. And when I was first at ISA, we had one editor-in-chief who did everything, and then everything was going through that person to reviewers, and that was Bob Miller, right? Well, they switched to what is more common, which is an associate editor system where you have various subject matter experts, and those people are kind of delegating, they're given the paper, like, you're the soils person, or you're the hydrology person, and they get the ones that fit that kind of theme, and then they're in charge of finding reviewers for that content. And if that's the kind of structure you have, the reviewers will give their recommendations and their critique of the paper. The editor, the associate editor, will read those and kind of get their take on it, and then that editor will send the recommendations along with the reviewer's recommendations to the editor-in-chief, who is the final arbitrator of the fate of your paper. And so there's one person who's really in charge of the decisions, but they will rely on the feedback of the folks that are looking at it ahead of time. So, and there can be, anywhere along the line, a paper can get kicked back to you. So an editor may just reject it just because the paper is not in the scope or not novel enough, right? An associate editor who has more, more of a basis of the research itself may see a methodological flaw. That when I was associate editor for a very short period of time, I would go straight to the methods. And if I saw something that was glaringly obvious, I would kick it back as a reject, just so I wouldn't be wasting reviewer time, because it's so hard finding reviewers. It's a thankless task, honestly. And then the reviewers, they're the ones kind of doing the grunt work, spending their day or two or three reviewing your paper and really doing a deep dive and critique. So there are decisions that can be made, and you might get accepted as is, which is kind of like a rare. I've had it happen twice, but those were papers that were usually short communications, and I had a copy editor look at them ahead of time, and I just knew they were a slam dunk, right? But they're rare. They're very rare. Minor revisions are. What was that? That's great. Anyways, so minor revisions are most of it's pretty much there. You might have some minor typos and things, or errors, or formatting things, or maybe a figure's a little wonky that they want to correct. So major revisions are probably what the majority of papers that are accepted start out as. Garrett, could you mute, please? And then, so there's more substantial issues that the reviewers found with your work. You may have to do some editing, you may have to add some more data, reanalysis. They can be quite labor intensive. And then there are things called reject and resubmit, which the nearest I can tell is it's just the journal trying to game the system. Because major revisions are a major undertaking, right? And journals are trying to speed up the rate at which they return manuscripts, and they publish manuscripts from start to finish. And a reject and resubmit is restarting the clock essentially for a major revisions. You're leaving the door open. If you get a reject and resubmit, it looks bad because you see that reject first, but it means you have your foot in the door. And if you want to do the work, I've had a number of papers that have gone from there to accepted, usually with a couple rounds of revision. So if you are rejected and there is no and resubmit afterwards, it's probably a total rejection, and the verbiage and the rationale behind it will kind of allude to that. It might say that they don't want to see the work again, right? It may be as blunt as that. And if that happens to you, your paper is not doomed, right? It may not be a good fit for that journal, or there may be some real things you have to work through. But once you do, you can find a journal that will be more accepting of the work, given its limitations, some of which you can't address, right? So if that's the case, take the time to read the reviews and reassess your work, and then, you may still have a home for that. So don't give up on it. Another reason the book said that, papers are rejected is just because you have a mix of useful and flawed data. So some of the data you collected is really interesting, and the editor has pointed that out. But they have some serious concerns with maybe some of the survey questions you have, right? They think that they're biasing the respondent or something like that. Well, you will have to just kind of look at what data there is, and hopefully you have enough to just piece out the stuff that they have issue with and still tell a story with what remains and have that story be meaningful. And then so you can, and then you have to, everything that gets removed, you have to go back to the methods, the results, the discussion, make sure that every little bit that was alluding to that portion of your data set is now corrected, so it doesn't have, you don't have these ghosts of what was there beforehand. I've had that happen, and it always confuses the reviewers, right? And then yeah, you may be able to resubmit this right back to the same journal, or you may take this and just be like, I'm going somewhere else, depending on how the experience was leading up to that point. You can have really good data and your paper can still be rejected because the message wasn't right. It was hard to read. Your findings were buried under piles and piles of summary tables and things like that. The reader got lost in your methodology and your logic, and it just didn't go over well, right? Well, that's great, because that means you don't have to take any more data. You don't have to throw anything out. You just need to really assess what you're trying to say and make sure that it's a logical thought all the way through, and the writing is easy to understand. And if it's just a writing thing, if writing's a hard thing for you, I do use things like editors. When I have cash laying around, and I'm working on maybe like some writing that someone else has started that I'm kind of working on. I'm not a good editor myself. And for like $7 a page, you can hire someone who is a good editor to do it for you way cheaper than my hourly wage would be, right? And when I do that, when I go this route, Editing Queen's my go-to down there from BYU. I usually skip a whole round of review. Like it'll go from what would have been a major revision is usually like a minor revision in my mind, and then it will go to accept the next round. And so that helps quite a bit. I use that not all the time, but when I see that there's a problem with the paper and it would take too much work for me to do, I will leave it to the experts. And sometimes papers are just rejected and they're perfectly fine. Like they're constructed well, they're explained well, but the paper is just not what the journal wants, because they don't think it has the impact that they want. They're trying to, get, a cachet or like, some sort of like they want to curate the best stuff for their journal because they want to be high impact, right? And that's kind of just snootiness in my mind. And there are good journals out there that will take things regardless of their novelty, right? Urban Forestry, Urban Greening, which is one of the highest rated journals in forestry, will take anything if it's sound science. Plus One, when they first came out, they had it right in their statement that they are they're inclusive of all research regardless of novelty or impact, right? And when they first came out with this philosophy, they had an impact factor of like 5 or 6, which is pretty decent, and it kind of showed me that, that's kind of overhyped, that whole novelty thing, People just want solid research, and if it rings true to what they're working on, they're going to cite it, right? If you get past rejections, which I don't know how often they happen, maybe 1 in 3, 1 in 2, depending on the journal. That is spitballing that right there. You get to the accept stage, then you will meet the third editor. So the first editor was the managing editor, that kind of was the initial gatekeeper, making sure that you're in the scope and things are formatted right. The second editor is the editor-in-chief, who will delegate things to associate editors. And the third one is a production editor. So once everything's accepted and your revisions have been made, things will go to typesetters and be laid out, and then some real serious editing will occur. Often this starts out with a robot. Like all these editors use like really kick-butt AI systems to catch most of the problems up front, but then they'll use their skills to, like, supplement that. And even the typesetting is often AI driven, so you can get some really wonky things. So you have to keep an eye out for that, because they may not catch that, especially because they're moving lots of things through, right? But they will have a list of queries for you, which this one is query 1, query 2. This is from a Frontiers paper I had. And then you have to respond to each one of those, either in a little text box on a form, or in a PDF, or what have you, or in comment sections. So, and often it's just things like, are your names right? That we have your surname, because people have really complex names. Do you have your surname underlined? Because that's how we're going to index it, right? There's this missing type citation. You have this citation that has no reference in the reference section. That's often what I have. What do you want to do with this? And I just usually leave it. So, when you get to proof stage, things go really quick. You have a really tight turnaround, and these queries will look something like this. It'll be kind of almost a perfectly laid out version of what's going to be published. It will still have line numbers, so you can kind of have comments on it. And then those queries are going to be highlighted in the margins, so you can click on them and address them. So, and this is like, at this stage, I get very serious. Like, I'm serious about editing right before I submit it, and then I'm, in the revision process, you want to have it as clear as possible. But at this stage, after this, it's going into print, and any stupid typos you have will be out there for everyone to see, and they will see them. I've seen like pie charts with like 120%, like some overachieving pie charts out there, and other things. And this is your chance to look at. I always want to get at least 3 authors looking at it if you have that many. And I always want every single author to at least check their name, make sure that's written how they want it, if they don't have time. So, and with that, those are kind of like the highlights of the reading, kind of get everyone up to speed for where we were. But now we're going to open up for your questions, right? So I want to thank Sarah for coming today. Sarah was my advisor at Illinois. I was orphaned for about a half a year, and she took pity on me and brought me into her lab, which was a great environment. And we did all sorts of great things. We did like how to write a lot. We did reading groups, and we read the book that we're reading for this class as a group, and that was very important to me as a young writer. So Dr. Lovell is the H.E. Garrett Chair of Agroforestry at the University of Missouri, and she leads the Center for Agroforestry there as well. She was also an inspiration for academics that have like hobbies and a life outside of their work, because she
was really,
yeah, you were like
okay.
all the stuff that you did. I'm like, oh, we can actually like take care of ourselves. This is cool, So the body is not just something that gets your mind to meeting, so I want to open it up to her and ask some questions. I'm going to start out with my question I always ask at this point, and then I will bring up my questions so I can actually read them. But the question I start out with, like kind of fumble around here, is, can you recall your first writing experience as a student, and how did it go? Was it terrible? Was it exciting? Was it a little bit of both? And what was your biggest lesson learned during that experience?
Okay. So it's going back a lot of years, I'll tell you. So when I finished my master's degree, I basically had 2 manuscripts that were pretty close to ready to be submitted. But also when I graduated with my master's degree, I was like 9 months pregnant and about to have a baby. So, and I was finishing and I needed to find a job and I didn't have a job yet. So I was in this period of like having a baby, trying to recover, trying to get an interview to get a job. And then I got a job. So I'm starting a new job in industry with a baby, and getting messages from my advisor that, hey, now's the time we'd want to submit these manuscripts to journals. So just the concept of adding that onto everything else was probably the freakiest part of the whole thing for me. The idea that I was going to be expected to be the corresponding author, and I didn't know what it would entail, honestly. The process itself isn't super memorable, which makes me think it wasn't terrible. I remember some horrible revision experiences on chapters of my thesis before it got that far, but the reviewer comments from those manuscripts must not have been too terrible. So yeah, I kind of figured my way through it and somehow got those things published.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. Like often students, when you finish, if you didn't get it out there for review while you're still a student, it gets really hard to keep going with it. And don't be afraid. Like I left mine in the hands of my advisor when I got a job after my master's. So I was starting a new job like Sarah. I didn't have the mental capacity, or I had kids too that were brand new, and I just couldn't get it done. And my advisor got over the line for me, and he was
Yeah.
going to do that. So I mean, I had to like let go of some control, and it was fine because I didn't have to think about it,
Yeah, and some advisors do that as a default. And I was so naive. Well, I was just so naive as the first few years of my graduate program. I had no clue what was going on. I didn't know what was expected or whatever. But my advisor was near retirement age, and he was an ARS person. He actually worked for ARS, but within the university system. And it just it seemed like the expectation that I was going to be the corresponding author. I didn't know there was another option at that point. But it seems like now a lot of advisors do take that role. But I would encourage you, if you can be the corresponding author yourself, especially if you're thinking about a career in academia, to go ahead and take the reins on that, because there's a lot to be learned in that process of what happens after that manuscript is submitted.
Agreed. I think, yeah, definitely if you have the capacity to do it. But if you don't, please don't sweat it, especially if
right. Right,
So,
for sure.
Awesome. So Elise, did you have a question that you saw in the chat, or that was in the list that you were excited to pose to Sarah?
Yeah, so we've got a few good ones already. I want to pick, let's see, which one did I want to pick? One sec. So this one question was about revisions, and they wanted to know if you could talk about your experience with, accepting revisions and revising your papers, if they request, in particular, if they wanted you to do further revisions than you really wanted to. And I guess specifically, let's see, has a request for further revision ever suggested to you that you need to look elsewhere for publication, potentially?
Okay, so there's a lot in there. Definitely I've seen reviewers suggest that, or even associate editors suggest that they do go elsewhere with the paper, but usually that's accompanied with a reject. So I don't know that I've seen a situation where there was a option to revise and resubmit, but still recommend they go elsewhere. So that, yeah, I haven't really seen that. the review process and making revisions, I mean, it's just a super important process, that process of going through the revisions. Okay, first of all, I think it's useful to say, and Andrew kind of alluded to this, that being a reviewer is not a fun job. Reviewers catch all sorts of slack. Like if you're on academic Twitter or something, everybody's always complaining about the reviewer. But if you've been a reviewer, there is no fun in that. It is literally that thankless job that no one is paying you for. It's maybe a little blip on your CV if you add, one more paper you reviewed or whatever. It doesn't help us much at all, except maybe just knowing what's going on in our field. So from the reviewer perspective, you're committing a lot of time to this paper, and usually the reviewer has the best intentions in mind in trying to get the paper to, a form that's going to be acceptable for publication. And sometimes they're really rough comments. They're trying to get you to the point that you do really explore what you could do different, or maybe you do need to go to a different journal. Maybe it really isn't the greatest journal for that. So I think having that mindset as you go into it is really, really important, that somebody has put a lot of work into thinking about your work and trying to help out and usually provide constructive criticism. Obviously, there are comments that come out that don't come out sounding very constructive. So then I think it's just super important to make sure that you address each one of those comments. And Andrew and I have talked about this some. There are various methods. I kind of had a method when we worked together on making sure you get comments all through your paper, get everything very well documented. You want to make it so that the associate editor and the reviewer, if it goes back to the reviewer again, can super easily see exactly what you did. At the time, we didn't have track changes when we went through this, and so, or at least maybe we did, and I didn't know how to use it. It could be what happened at that point in life. But so at the time, before I was at least using track changes, you would just be really explicit, like, addressing this comment. You tell them exactly, like, I am replacing this with this, so they don't have to go back to the paper and try to find it or figure it out or whatever. Yeah, and just kind of making sure that you really detail that out very specifically. So the associate editor, if the more information you give them, the quicker they can say, okay, yeah, looks like this person addressed 90% of the comments. And then there are always going to be some, I don't know that I've ever had a situation where there wasn't at least a comment or two that I was not going to make the change that was suggested. Either I didn't agree with it, or it was just like, if they're asking for more data and you're not at that institution anymore, it's, that's not going to happen. So you come up with a really good justification for why it's not needed. And I don't know that there's any hard and fast rule, but I would say if you respond to and change maybe 75 or 80% of the recommendations from the reviewer, then that last 20 to 25%, maybe you have a little wiggle room and can write up a really great justification. Also, oftentimes with that justification, including new material or new descriptions in the paper that clarify it maybe for the next reader. So if that reviewer had that question, whatever it is, and maybe they interpreted it wrong, then it's likely that another reader could also interpret it wrong. So even if you don't change whatever it is specifically, you may need to provide more of a description, or a lot of times in papers, we have an area where we put limitations of the study. And so this is where maybe they detected a limitation that you hadn't already included. And so you can say, okay, I'm not able to change it, but I described this limitation in that section. And if it's huge, sometimes there are cases where you want to bring up that limitation at the very beginning. If there's something really good in there, but there's something that's just like a little bit off that somebody could easily pick up on, if you just take it straight on and say, yeah, this paper, this study, we didn't do such and such, this is why there's still value in what we did for this reason, and then go into it.
That's funny. So I was smiling when you said 80% or 75 to 80%.
Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of pulled that out.
Well, I knew like you were leading into it. Like I was, there's no hard and fast rule, and I'm like 80% in my head. And then when you said it, I'm like, yep, that's about right.
All right.
That's 2 data points and up 2 here.
Yeah.
And I think like a rule for me is to get to that 80%. If it's a simple change, like someone's like, I don't like your title, change it to this. I don't care. I'll just do it because like
Right. Even
there.
if you think your title is like super great and amazing, unless you're just really, really tied to that thing, just let it go. It's kind of like with kids, like pick your battles,
Mhm.
take care of the easy stuff, do that. And then the ones that are going to be really a challenge for you, save your justification points for that.
Yeah, one of our past years, Allison and I, we were in like a clever title mode for a while, and we were getting like clever title. So we just cut the whole front part off, and then they were happy, and it was like really just delete,
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and save that battle for the more data request.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
So there was a couple things there. One is you have a review process. I was a little sad to hear that you switched to track changes because I still do your line by line thing. Yeah, so the line by line response, you said that's important because it allows them to just read through all their changes and make sure that every one of their comments was addressed easily. It doesn't pay to like try to like, oh, that one's tough, I'm just gonna hide it or delete it, just
Right.
what other process do you have? Someone here asked a good question. Is like, do you tackle the easy changes first or the big changes first when you have a big pile of things that you're looking at? What's your strategy for get easy changes?
I would say usually the easy ones first, except if I think there's going to be a decent amount of rewriting. Like if I feel like a section is going to have to be rewritten or reorganized, then I might do that first before I do the little stuff, because sometimes the little stuff is actually removed or lost in that whole process. But usually, yeah, I mean, it's still hard for me to open up the email of the decision letter for a paper. And usually what I'll do is I'll be like, okay, I'm going to open it up. I'm just going to look at it. And then I'm not going to address it for 24 hours or something. I'll just let it sink in, because usually there's something in there that'll make me mad or, or whatever. So yeah, so I'll kind of read it through, but just let it go for a little bit, and then tackle a few things that aren't too bad to just feel like I'm making some progress. And then, yeah, get into the bigger, deeper ones. And that helps you figure out like where your 80% is too.
Yeah, exactly. And so I always do the easy things first because I like to trick myself into doing hard things. And so, like I do use your format that you had where it was like their point and then your response highlighted in yellow underneath it. And then as soon as I have like that critical mass of like most things are highlighted because the easy things are all done, then I'll start tackling like the big things. But then you're right, because sometimes I'll just remove something that they told me to remove, and I have to go back and change what I already commented to, saying this has been fixed through deletion,
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of rework, but I don't mind.
Yeah, it's still, I mean, yeah, in general, I would say tackling the easy stuff first is the good way to go.
So you're an associate editor, right?
So I'm an editor for a small journal, the Journal of Urban Agriculture and Regional Food Systems, which is a journal that was acquired by the ASA, CSSA, SSSA, Tri-Societies. And so they acquired it maybe about 3 years ago, and it was a very, very small, and it still is pretty small journal. So we don't have a ton of submissions to have to go through. So the structure of our journal, yeah, I'm the editor. We have a managing editor. We have that whole list of associate editors, like you talked about, that are subject matter experts, and probably now have maybe maybe around 16 of those. And they also serve as advisory board members for our journal. So in addition to doing the editor duties, we're always asking them for other support in kind of like defining the scope of our journal and thinking of areas to expand, looking for conferences where we might try to get a special issue organized or something like that, which is for our journal, because it's so small and we're really, a lot of the need is to make the journal grow. That is almost more important of a role for them than their associate editor role.
Yeah, like the marketing of the journal and reaching out.
Yeah, right.
How did you structure your editorial board? Are they early career folks? Are they like the big names in the field? Because that's kind of a challenge to, like, you know, fill that board and to
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Yeah, for us, there was a major geographic aspect to it, trying to cover countries that we wanted to pull papers from.
Mhm.
So it's very geographically diverse and covers a lot of different countries. And so filling the gaps in different subject matter areas and matching those with countries that aren't represented has been kind of one of our tasks in doing that. And then a few of the kind of big name people too. But it can be hard to, you know, the big name people are being asked by a lot of different journals that have some overlap. So oftentimes they don't agree to do it.
Yeah. And so what I still have one more question on the process for you, and then we can move on to some student questions. But, you know, like one of the process, we saw that flow chart with like the various levels, and you said you have an associate level or a subject matter expert level. How many reviewers do they typically enlist when they're having a review? Is it is it 2? Is it 3?
So for ours, they're required to get 2 reviewer responses back. But to get 2, they're probably sending out requests to as many as like 15 just to get 2 successful ones back. And reviewers are overtapped. I mean, for sure, they're getting so many requests. I can't, yeah, Andrew, you probably too, like any one day, the number of requests you get to review something or just, yeah, it's ridiculous. So, you know, most of the time we're saying no as our other reviewers. So yeah, so 2. Occasionally when they really struggle, what we'll encourage the associate editor to do is to provide a review themselves too. So if they get one really review that's pretty thorough and they feel really good about, but they can't seem to get this other reviewer in there, then we might say, well, can you as the subject matter expert, can you provide that other review? And so then they're in this position where they kind of have to combine, you know, what the other reviewer said with both their reviewer hat and their associate editor hat to come up with the decision.
Yeah. No, it's quite a task, and it is a thing that's job. The other day, Rich Hauer asked me to review a paper, and I just responded to him like, I thought we were friends. What is?
I know, right? I know. And what's so funny is like when you reject taking on the review thing and the journal asks you to give recommendations, I'm like, no, I'm not going to like put my other friends under the bus and trying to make them do more reviews. No way am I going to give you my good reviewers? No, sorry.
Great. Elise, why don't you look through the student comments and questions and see what nuggets are in there, and I will find my question.
Sure. So where was the question? Oh my goodness, my brain is not working today. Okay, so I want to ask another question about going through revisions. Okay, here it is. So there's a question on how you address comments from reviewers that you can't understand. And then this also kind of leads into another question that I think is related, and it's just like, what does the communication look like between you and the editors or you don't talk directly to the reviewers. So, you know, if you have a question like that, like you can't understand what they want you to do, let's say, how do you actually deal with that? Can you contact somebody? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, you could probably contact the associate editor. A lot of times people don't. It's it's not going to be a happy interact back and forth, and they're going to kind of help you get to whatever through a bunch of back and forth. They don't really have time for that in most cases. Although I will talk after this is over, I can talk about some new journal formats that do something more back and forth like that. But if there's really a complete lack of clarity, I mean, there's a pretty good chance that if it's super unclear, maybe the associate editor didn't understand it either. So start with the associate editor's comments first. So even before you get into the reviewer's comments, the associate editor sometimes will give you some guidance on where to put your energy. They may tell you, like, reviewer one's comments are very helpful. Please make sure you address all of those, which might suggest to you that maybe reviewer two's comments aren't as important, if you're kind of reading between the lines there. And sometimes they'll tell you a specific comment that a reviewer made that they feel like you really need to address. Sometimes they will say too, if they don't understand something, or they might just say, that the comments from reviewer two about such and such weren't clear to me either. So yeah, so you could try, if there's one thing in there that is clearly something major that you need more clarification on, you could try checking with the associate editor about that and see if they have a better perspective on it. If it's a few things here and there that are like you're not quite sure, I wouldn't bug the associate editor about that. I'd probably just do your best to interpret it as you can. And in your response, you talked about me doing track changes. I do that sometimes for certain journals, but there's still others that I do the whole like long response. And even with track changes, I'll add in comments that like really describe what I was thinking through a lot of this. So in your response to a reviewer, you can say, I didn't really understand what this question was about. My interpretation is this, and I addressed it in this way, and just leave it at that.
Yeah, I just did that this week, actually. I'm like, I chalked it up to like my 20%. That's a pass.
Right,
And
right.
I'm like, I had some words there saying I tried, not quite sure what this means. I tried, and then
Yep.
hopefully they'll just wave it by.
Yeah, and always be nice to the reviewer. Like always start with, we really appreciate that the reviewer suggested such and such. And if you make that change, and so we made that change, or but such and such, here's our justification. Because that paper could totally be sent back to those reviewers. Those comments could go right back to the reviewer to determine if they've been addressed adequately.
Yeah, and I've had some reviewers that have had like a lot of gusto behind their thoughts, where like the paper was 10 pages and I had like 14 pages of review, and having the associate editor say like, maybe focus on this was really helpful, because it allowed me to like ignore a lot of that dialogue that they were having.
Right, yeah. And the associate editor totally has the call on what to do about whether or not to send it back to review. So they could do a lot of different things once they get your comments back. They could send it back to all of the reviewers that reviewed it to see if their changes had been adequately made. That doesn't happen that often because we feel like we're taxing reviewers already. We don't want to make them do it again if we don't have to. But that they could do that. They could send it back to just one. Like if it was just one, like say one reviewer rejected it and the other one accepted it with minor changes or something, and the associate editor generally thinks it should probably go through, and they're kind of trying to bring the reject reviewer on board, then maybe they'll send it back out just to double check on that. And they can also send it out to a new reviewer. Maybe if they're really conflicting opinions between the two reviewers and the associate editor themselves doesn't feel like they can make the call, either they don't know the topic area well enough or they can understand both sides or whatever, they may just send it out to a totally new third reviewer.
Very,
Okay.
very nice. So students have asked before, like, how do they become reviewers? Which
Mm.
brings up the question, how do you find them? How does an editor find people that are qualified to judge the merit of the work you receive? I think last time we actually discussed, there's a list that authors are often required to give, but what tools do you have on your side to find other people?
Yeah, so most journals do ask the author to decide to recommend a few, but you usually don't want to rely just on that. And I wouldn't even want, yeah, I wouldn't want to have both of the reviewers be ones that were recommended. I want one that was free of that. So our system, a very automated system, has some sort of structure in there where it's curating names of authors and reviewers from the past journals, not just within our system, but it's probably all the Tri-Society journals, their whole system. So it's kind of curating names connected to those topic areas. And that can be pretty helpful. I always double check them. Like if they're giving me names I've never heard of, I'll go, just do their Google Scholar and see if they're really in the content area and that they're quality. Google Scholar is good for just kind of getting a sense of how much writing this person has actually done.
Mhm.
So that's a good way. I mean, it hasn't been above me to just like do a open Google search and be like, this topic area, professor or university or something, and just kind of start from scratch there. I'll always again double check it, but sometimes I'm like, I am at a loss here. And then we can always, we try to connect it with our colleagues. That's the most logical thing. But again, like Andrew says, you get something from one of your colleagues that recommends you as your reviewer, and you're like, oh, really? Come on, I'm so busy. So we almost don't like to do that to our colleague friends, maybe to our colleague not as friendly friends
Mhm.
or something like that. So yeah, there are a lot of different ways, and we use all of them because it's so difficult to find them. Oh, another thing that you can do, and I recommend this for if you're having trouble figuring out who to recommend as a reviewer, is look at the citations that you have. And if they're kind of pivotal papers that have been referenced in there, those are really good ones to try to get a reviewer for, because if the invited reviewer actually looks at the paper and sees that their paper's been cited in a pivotal way, or maybe they've been cited multiple times, they're going to have more more skin in the game to see what happens with that paper. They want to see if they've been cited properly, and their hope is that it's a really good paper and that it uses their work in a positive light, and that then it becomes a paper that helps with their citation
Mhm.
numbers. So that's kind of like there is an incentive in that, like getting more of their work cited and out there. So that's a great method on both of those ends, both from the associate editor end and from the trying to find a good reviewer end.
Yeah, and I remember when I had a brief foray as a associate editor, I tried all sorts of strategies. I think I said this last call, like looking at like PhD students on papers, looking at like folks that were towards retirement, like trying to
Yeah, right.
there's
Right.
never any rhyme or reason to it, honestly. So, but I think
Yeah.
what you said, when they have their work cited, that was something that really did help. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, oh, let's see what they wrote. And it's
Right.
gotta be something that you're excited to read then too, because often you get review requests that are like just on the periphery of your expertise because you had one paper that you wrote on it with some collaborators.
Hmm.
And it's like that's not as exciting as something that's like right in your lane.
Right. Definitely. And the other question there was, I guess, the students who want to become reviewers how can they do that? And I would say probably a first step is to talk to your advisor and say, I'd really like to review a paper. And it may be that your first one or something you kind of do under your advisor's guys. So they may take a paper and say, you help review it. They review your comments. And so it's kind of a combined effort to do it the first time so that you can kind of get a sense of how that's all working. But then you can also ask your advisor just to, you know, if they get a paper in your area that they don't have time to review, can they just recommend you as the reviewer? Because again, we get all these, you know, every time we say no, decline this request, there's that ask for, can you recommend any reviewers? So they could say, yeah, this person.
Great idea. So the paper that Rich sent me, at least it's gonna be on your desk on Monday. So thank you.
Right.
No, I won't do that to you. Did you have a question then, Lisa? It's your turn.
So there is a question I liked. What does it look like to submit a paper when you're doing independent research, not through a university?
It just totally varies. It totally varies. I mean, you could definitely be an independent person, you know, working as a consultant or, you know, being self-employed or whatever, being in a different career path than you were at the time. If you've never been associated with an institution, I mean, it'll be reviewed in the same way, but sometimes you don't kind of have the background to be super comfortable with what the expectations are. So I would say those papers probably end up getting rejected more often, but not just because the person isn't associated with an institution. It's more probably related to maybe they don't have the structure there to get the paper to where it needs to be to be a acceptable manuscript. Does that make sense? And I guess I'd need to know more about that context. Like certainly if you're working in industry, I was working in industry after my master's and after my PhD. I wasn't associated with a university at that point. And in certain industries, that's very common to also be publishing.
Yeah, I think, you know, and it ranges. So there in urban forestry and arboriculture, we have a couple of rock star consultants like Lovell and Jerry Bond, who they have no problem publishing, you know, peer-reviewed stuff. But as you know, as Sarah was alluding to, I've seen as a reviewer it go horribly bad. You know, like you don't have that background if you don't, you know. And then there's other things like access to literature, you know, and things like that that just work against the independent reviewer, unfortunately.
Yeah, same. Yeah, and I always wonder sometimes, like occasionally I'll get a paper that's kind of a single author paper that looks as though the student is publishing without a co-author in there, someone who had been their advisor. And I'm always a little bit skeptical of like, did that person really do this as a sole effort on their own, based on the stage they're at or whatever? Like, you know, because in most cases they're getting funding from an advisor, they're getting input on the concept. And so, you know, even if they're the first author, it's kind of rare in that kind of situation that they would be the solo author.
So I have a whole list of scenarios that I wrote up that I think you saw. And this is the scenario where you either have a reject and resubmit or a modify / revisions kind of thing. And some what ifs when you look at what the reviewers are doing. So here's the first one. What if the reviewer just doesn't like gives you like a reject or something like that, or but they don't give you any guidance after that. It's just like a very terse kind of like maybe a paragraph summary, but they don't really give you anything to work with. How do how does that reflect on your prospects of revising that?
Yeah, again, in that case, I would really hope the associate editor would provide some guidance on how they felt about that. So you're asking like one reviewer says reject, the associate editor probably comes back with a decision that's more like major revisions or something like
and
that.
I mean, was accept with revision or something like that.
Yeah. Clearly, the associate editor feels like there's potential with this, and so the reject, you know, if there's no basis in it, I guess I'd almost just ignore it and I'd deal with the other reviewers' comments and try to make it the best paper it was based on the other reviewer comments.
You know, I think it's kind of interesting is I published a few articles in Frontiers, and if you reject a paper, you're kicked out of the review commentary period, right?
Yeah, and actually that's the journal format I was talking about, where it's that back and forth in different format completely. Yeah, so I didn't know that because I haven't gone through the whole process with those. So they'll kick that reviewer out then,
Yeah, so
right?
you don't even have to
Okay.
address their comments because they're like,
Huh.
they're this, if everyone said reject, then it's going to be rejected, right?
Mhm.
But if the editor's siding with the people that are like, yeah, let's revise this, then then you have to talk with the people that are like asking for revisions, because at the very end of it, everyone who signs off and agrees that your paper is ready to be published, their names are stamped on that final manuscript.
Okay. Yeah.
They
Okay. That
endorse
makes
it, and if they don't, they get kicked out, right?
Yeah.
And they
Yep.
need a critical mass of people endorsing your paper. It's really quite kind of fun, honestly. And I also love that it's an open system, so they see who you are, you see, well, at the end you see who they are. So there's no punching in the dark that sometimes happens.
Mhm.
Rarely, sometimes,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's quite nice. And actually,
Yeah.
the last paper we published to them, I liked the reviewer so much, and she had really great comments, and she was a researcher from Miami that I really hadn't interacted with before, that we just had a call this week because I want to work on a
Oh,
project,
really? Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I have not gone to, I've been a co-author on one of those papers, but not the corresponding author on one that's gone through that New Frontiers format. And I'll say that the person I was working with, who was the lead author, corresponding author, it was making this person totally nuts because there was this one reviewer that just they kept going back and forth and back and forth. It was like never good enough, and it just took so long. And he was definitely the point, like, when were the days where you could just like respond to the reviewers and then
Yeah,
get your decision and it's done.
I will say, yeah, it seemed to drag out longer, because
Yeah.
you just do it the normal way, like the traditional way. It's like rush, 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 get it out, and then you sit. But this was iterative the whole time. There's like little bits, little things were changing, So
Yeah, that's interesting.
here's another what if. What if the reviewer points out a flaw of your paper that you can't correct? Legitimate flaw with the method.
Yeah, my first step would be to just address it straight up. And again, similar to some of the other comments I had, I think your first step is try to keep it in this journal if you can. Make your best case for there being enough in here without this flawed situation. Make sure you fix whatever is wrong, get things corrected, and make that super clear. If there's something if there's something in the data that is just completely off and completely messes up your results, then you're really in trouble. Then yeah, you may have to go a little bit back to the drawing board at that point. But usually it's just like maybe one part of it that you can fix, let them know exactly what's been fixed, whatever. And yeah, just be as straightforward with all of it as you can. And then again, there's that kind of situation where maybe it's not flawed data, but it's maybe the methods weren't quite what people were expecting or something like that, where maybe bringing up those issues earlier in the paper to make it clear that, like, yeah, we were. So here's an example. One of the papers I had, one of my graduate students was leading. We had sent out surveys into a region that had been extremely over surveyed. So even despite the fact that we followed the Dillman method, instead of 30%, we had like under 10%, I think, participation. So it was so low, and it was so far below what we had hoped to have for our sample size. So we just, like, from the very beginning said, yeah, we recognize that this is a small sample. It's not going to be representative. It's likely biased. We recognize that, but still there are some themes in here in this, what's probably a biased group, that can provide some really important messages for these different areas.
Yeah. No, that is good. I had a confounding issue with a paper once. And I adjusted it like right at the time, like, okay, this is a factorial.
Mhm,
But I can't make all the comparisons I hope to make. So
mhm.
I'm only gonna make the ones I can legitimately make without confounding things.
Yeah,
And the reviewers like, thanks for the honesty, that you handled it the best way you could, given
yeah,
the,
right,
you know.
right.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Yeah, go for it.
Related to methods and limitations, for those of us who are master's students, our time in school and doing our research, if we're doing a thesis or something, is going to go by really quickly. And so one obvious limitation is time. And ideally, we'll study something that is appropriate to study. We'll set up our methods in a way that, okay, we can do it in the time, but it is still a limitation, so I'm wondering if how should we address that? Because you can't just say in the paper the lead author, researcher was a master's student. They had to do
Mhm.
fewer reps or something because they didn't have the time. So I don't know what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Sarah,
I think, I
okay.
think in some cases you can really make a case for you. This is such an emerging topic that you just like got to get out there in front of it. So it's really important that that this work is kind of establishment phase or whatever. That there's a lot more work to do here. More years of research are gonna send us in a great direction, but you want to get something out there. It's important to the field that you have kind of these really even the initial work. And some journals have categories. What journal is it that has a category called From the Field or something? That's a little bit shorter article, and it's that idea that sometimes these things are earlier phase important findings that you could get out there. So
Exactly.
that's
Yeah,
one approach. Yeah.
I think ASHS has one that's called preliminary findings. And then
Mm-hmm.
other ones have short communications, which have that preliminary finding kind of description in there. Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good point. And I've also seen people like put a proof of concept or something in their title, like something
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
hint that it's, somewhat limited, and
Uh-huh.
people know what it is when they see it, you know.
Mhm. And it's
That's
okay. I
very
mean, most of us have been there. Most people don't do a straight through PhD. So yeah, most people have had to figure out how to get something out of a short 2 years, 2.5 year master's that sometimes involves field work and can be really tricky. If it's true field work, like when I worked on my master's degree, I was in agronomy at the time, and they kind of had a strategy. It was like you made sure you got 2 full field seasons in. Preferably, you had your first field season before you actually started the program. So at least 2 field seasons, but you have multiple locations. So we ended up usually calling, it kind of depended on the statistics, but a lot of times we'd call the combination of years and different locations environments. So you end up with like, if you have 2 years and 3 locations, then you have like 6 environments.
Yeah, Don Bullock taught me that trick. That was
Well, he probably taught me that trick too then.
a changer. Yeah, he was our
Yeah.
stats person at Illinois, and he was very creative. So cool. Here's another what if. What happens when the reviewer wants you to write a different paper? Like, you've had your questions and they're like, well, it'd be really great, but it really should have been this. That happens.
Uh-huh. Yeah, oh yeah, that definitely happens. And I would probably respond to that something like, that's a great idea. I'm going to write that paper next. But for now, this is the one that we're looking at.
Exactly. Now that's perfect. That's kind of what I do too. It's like, oh, we're working on that one.
Right. In progress. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. What if they ask you to collect more data and it's not that situation where you've left that institution and you don't have access to like collecting more data? What if you
Yeah.
legitimately could collect more data if you had the gumption to do it?
I mean, that happens all the time. All the time. This is so common. I can't even tell you. yet that's where you use that 20%, you know, you try to answer everything else and then you use your 20% for making that case for why it's adequate the way it is. That's my best recommendation, because there are so many times, even if you still are at that institution, that you're just like, there is no, you know, you're to the point you're like, I'd rather just pull this one, yank this one out and go to a different journal and try again than to try to go back and, and start redoing studies or do them differently. I don't think I've ever done that. Well, I did a teeny tiny study once to kind of supplement what was going on, but it was because I was there and I could. But
Mhm.
many more times I've been like, no, we're going to make a case for what we've got here.
Yeah, the only time that we did it was we were doing a lit review and we missed a good chunk of stuff given our methods.
Oh, yeah.
Where we're just like the whole team was just like grabbing more citations from a different database that we didn't use.
Oh,
and-
yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah, that's easy enough. Yeah.
but it was at first we were like going to do the same thing, like save for 20%, and I'm like, no, let's just do it, you know, and
Mhm.
it was a lot of time. What if the reviewer asked you to reanalyze your data using a methodology you've never used before? I'm starting to run into this. Like the
Yeah.
stuff at Illinois is getting old.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's kind of a fair thing for them to ask if there are some new methods. And yeah, it's pretty like there's a good chance you don't know how to do them. But if you have access to people who do,
Mhm.
and or you can figure it out, then it's worth doing it. I mean, all of those things you'd be like, kind of look at it from their point too, and think, well, if I did this extra tiny little study or analyzed it differently so that I could at least see how these analyses compare, that's probably a good thing, right? Like we'll have a better understanding of what's going on if we try a couple different things here. So if you have that ability, then yeah, I would say give it a shot if you can. If not, then it's in your 20% and you justify the method you used.
Yeah, and I like I do a lot of logistic regression, and I was getting flack for not using this one common like kind of assessment to see if the analysis was right, ROC
Oh,
curve, and it just wasn't something we talked about when I was learning it. You know, it was kind of I was way before that. You know, and it happened like twice, and then it happened a third time. I'm like, okay, I have to learn this. So I just went on YouTube, and
nice.
like there's always a video for everything. Like if you want to replace some sensor on your car or something on your washer, or put in some sort of analysis in R or SAS, there's gonna be someone who devoted some time to making a video to show you how to do it, you know?
Right. So you probably learned how to do it. You did it. You're kind of like, hey, this is, you know, adds a little more validity to what I'm doing. And now you're probably the one asking other authors to do that same thing. Like, where is your
That,
whatever?
yep.
Uh-huh.
And it seriously took 15 minutes to learn. It was like a 14-minute
Right.
video. So
Yeah. There you
1
go.
minute to process it, you know?
Yeah. It's always trade-offs. Like how much time is it going to take to do this thing that they've asked for, and will it improve the paper?
What
Yeah,
happens
that's
when
all.
the reviewer points out several papers you forgot in your discussion or your intro that I think are key?
Yeah, I'll usually add them. I'll usually go and look at those papers. I mean, why not? If I look at them and they seem relevant, and usually I can weave that in. It's rarely a contradictory message. And even if it is, that's another thing where it's like, well, yeah, if there are contradictory messages out there about this, then we should actually be bringing that to this discussion and just address it. Like this author found this one found this, ours fit into this category, and just, you know, the more transparency, I feel like the better on
That's a
those
good
types of
point.
things.
I think often the times when you get that request, it is something that's contrary, you know?
Yeah, right.
Because once it's like asking you to pile on more literature, unless it's this scenario, what if the literature that they ask you to cite all happens to be from the same author group?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So yeah, definitely what you're alluding to there. And this does happen. It's probably the author is the reviewer. The author of those papers is the reviewer, and they're just trying to get their work cited. Oh, how have I dealt with that? Sometimes I'll cite just like one of their works, maybe just to fit it into the conversation and appease them. Like if you really feel like that's the case, the associate editor obviously knows what's going on. So they're not gonna push you to have 3 different papers that the reviewer wrote themselves on there. So just, choose
Mhm.
1 or 2 or whatever. And if they're horrible papers that don't fit, then just say that too. These aren't relevant for the work that we did.
And
That's
I have 2
fair.
more of these scenarios, and then I'm going to pass it on to Elise. So what happens when a viewer wants to just cut a bunch of stuff from your paper? Like, oh, I see this a lot. Like someone has a master's thesis,
Hmm.
big work, right? And
Yeah.
then trying to shoehorn it into a journal article, and people are like, there's just too much. You got to cut this section and this section and this section. How do you deal with that?
How I've dealt with it the most is looking at it and saying, hey, can this be 2 papers?
Mhm.
So there might be an opportunity there. If they're saying it's too much, cut this and this out. I start thinking about it. If I pulled all that out, could that be a separate paper? And then I can make 2 out of 1. So that
Mhm.
would be if that's an option, that would be my first choice. And again, looking at it from the reviewer perspective, if things are more succinct and a little bit straightforward, it is easier for the authors. Your message is probably going to get out there better. It's hard to part with that material. Like if you wrote it, and I still have trouble parting with material. I still have a hard time getting things down to the expected word counts, which are decreasing all the time. Like most of them right now are 5,000 words. That doesn't work for a lot of the stuff that I do. So it's painful to pull out things that your best paragraph that you felt like you were just on fire when you wrote this comment. So they're just psychological things you can do for yourself, like, put it in the parking lot or whatever, put it somewhere that you tell yourself you'll use it for something. Don't lose it all the way yet or whatever. Put it as a footnote for now, and ultimately it gets pulled out.
Okay, and my last scenario, and I'm going to pass the torch. What happens if someone is just straight up condescending in their responses? They call your work trivial, or something like that, or
Yeah. You know, first of all, I think the associate editor should have mentioned something about it not being appropriate for that reviewer to have responded in that way. If they didn't say something about that, I don't know, personally, I would have trouble not calling it out a little bit and saying to the associate editor, I feel like the comments that they made about this were inappropriate, and I hope that this reviewer doesn't act this way with all the reviews that they do, and call it out, because I guess it's possible the associate editor didn't totally pick up on it, and they should know that, because they don't want to be using that reviewer again if they're acting in that way. The last thing we want to do is be acting in a way that's unprofessional and it's pushing people out of sciences, and we just don't want that happening. So
Okay, very good. Thank you. And Elise, passing the torch. Thank you.
Yeah, those scenarios were really great. And I think the last few really hit on things that people have been kind of asking for weeks. Like, I kind of get this feeling like we're all just afraid that people are going to be mean to us. Or, their comments are going to be rude or something. Or maybe people are asking that because they've had that happen to them. And so they're just like, what do I do? So that was really helpful. Thank you. I
will say that, so there's a couple different things. Sometimes it's the perception of the rudeness too. There are people that just are super straightforward. Like they're just not gonna couch things in the make you feel better kind of way. They're just gonna go straight to the point. And if you can try to get beyond madness with them, which, okay, all of that's fair too. But if you can kind of get beyond that and being like, oh, okay, they're just trying to be straightforward, tell me straight up so I can get right at it. Let's not beat around the bush. So try to see if it's that instead of
Mhm.
something where they're just being completely inappropriate or unprofessional.
Yeah, like sometimes maybe it's a cultural thing too, or a communication style where it's like
Mhm.
it's better to be direct, and some people are more used to less directness.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, my mom was German and she was really good at direct. So
I'm usually kind of good at direct too, actually. So
so I think just in the interest of time, I think Andrew, a couple of questions overlap from you and the students around um, the proofs, publicizing, and celebration.
oh,
So I think just it'd be better in the last few minutes to spend time just finding out about how you like to publicize and how you like to celebrate. But I also just want to ask quickly about proofs. Um, so Andrew had said the turnaround time for proofs can be pretty rapid, like 48 hours, which I was wondering. I didn't know how
mm.
long it usually is. So how do you, like, if you get accepted and you're working on it, how do you navigate that final review, especially if you have multiple authors?
Yeah, they do ask a lot of times for really fast turnarounds. And I would say do your best to meet those deadlines and to get a few other author eyes on that. Um, if you absolutely can't, then just ask for an extension. Just ask for a couple more days and tell them, it's whatever, it's a cultural celebration period or something like that, that we need a couple more days on this. So yeah, I would I would definitely ask for an extension before I would not give it the thoroughness that it deserves. Because like Andrew said, that's the final version, and you're gonna find, I promise you, if you ever read your own material again, I promise you already that you're gonna find mistakes in there. But the fewer of those that you find, the better. So find them in the proof stage
yeah,
instead of later.
I always drop an S off of assess, and that doesn't get picked up by Microsoft Word, or
Oh,
yeah, and that's something you don't want in your papers. But would you say that people are generally like on the spot, like when it gets to that stage, everyone's like they know it's the last hurdle to get through, and people
yeah.
just will drop what they can to do that, right?
Right, because now they're seeing like one more publication for me. This is easy compared to having to do major revisions or anything a lot, new writing or anything like that. So people do typically get on board pretty quickly at that stage. And another thing at that stage is that you might be able to have somebody that's not a subject matter expert give it a good read too. I mean, yeah, a partner or a friend or something like that, or maybe within a peer group, because sometimes at this point it's sometimes just the silly language things that you've just read it over so many times, you're just not seeing the things that you were the one that wrote. So having somebody try to pick up on that.
And I had one more question that I'm just going to kind of make a comment on here is that the proof stage, these are generally minor tweaks. You
Yeah,
should
right,
be
right.
asking for like whole chunks being removed or like
Absolutely.
changing findings. Like that should have been worked out before that. So,
Right. It's
okay.
rare that you would even kind of modify a whole sentence or anything. It's more like a misspelling here or there or something like that at this point, hopefully. If you do find bigger problems than that, again, just be very straightforward with the whoever you're working with at that point, if it's the technical manager or whatever.
And at least I'm glad you talked about the publicizing your research because this is kind of fun, and celebration. I want to get those two in if we can. So how do you promote your research? How do you when you get a paper that's published, how do you get the word out to your friends and collaborators and the rest of the university and things like that? What do you choose to do?
Yeah. So I guess social media for me is a common one. And I use a number of different platforms. I don't I used to use Facebook, but I don't use that much anymore. So Twitter for me is maybe the best one for getting papers out. Just provide the link, give a cool, like figure out what the nugget is in your paper. Might not be the whole, might not have anything to do with the reason you started that research, but there's something like interesting nugget sentence in there. And so pull that out, put that as your quote, and send it out into the Twitterverse. And LinkedIn. I hadn't been doing much on LinkedIn at all until recently, but it seems like LinkedIn is more being used more by academics. Used to seem like it was all industry people and not so much academics, but it's definitely getting more and more to be academics. So, and people do share their papers. Don't be shy. I mean, just put it out there. You don't have to be super, braggadocious or whatever with it. Just, come up, just you're sharing information that most likely your network is really interested in. So they want to know. So get that out there. And then, so like with our Center for Agroforestry, the Center for Agroforestry also has all the social media platforms. And so we're always each month collecting the recent publications from all our faculty. And so those are all sent out in newsletters, and on our social media, we'll promote all of our different faculty members' papers here and there where we can. So even if a lot of them aren't on social media, and so we can promote their material there. And in the old days, I don't think I did promote it at all. Like in the old days before social media, I sort of, I guess once it was published, I kind of forgot about it and just let it hang out there. But
and it is cool. I like, and like ResearchGate is another one
oh yeah, yeah.
And it's like, I appreciate it when someone draws attention to something that would really interest me. Honestly, you're right. It's not like you're bragging. People can do it. People have done it wrong,
Right.
and how they promote their own work. But if they overclaim its significance and things like that, but
right. The most profound, check out the most profound paper on this topic. No, you don't have to do that at all. Just find the nugget of interest, something interesting or funny or something that appeals to people.
And here's the last question. And I thank you for your time. It's been great. Really happy with everything today. And the 80% rule, I'm running with that. So how do you celebrate? I mean, you've written a lot of papers. I'm sure you celebrated back in the day, maybe not so much anymore, but is there like a little ritual or something that you do when you get a paper across the line?
No, not anymore. So for my graduate students, if my graduate students publish theirs and they're still around, then I try to celebrate with them. So I think it's important, when you're in that period, it feels like your life's work. And so then it really does matter, and it's worth celebrating. And maybe, some people do celebrate all those things throughout their whole careers, and that's probably good too. It's just not me. I tend to be way on to the next thing. Like by the time that thing is published, I'm like, I don't even care anymore. I'm not even sure it's that interesting. I'm kind of on to the next thing.
Yeah. I think when I was in grad school, like I would take the family to El Toro, for that $5 platter.
Oh yeah, nice.
And that was fun, and I think that the sharing the success of your lab mates is really critical. I've seen labs like even go as far as like printing like a PDF on a coffee mug or something like that.
Oh yeah, I've seen that too. That looks cool. Yeah,
I think that's really cool, and this class has made me kind of think about that and how we should do that within the lab. So
yeah, I think it's a really good idea, honestly. Not something I'm just not much of a celebrator about anything. Like our family didn't even really celebrate birthdays or anything, so that just doesn't come naturally to me. But I do think it's a really good idea to kind of take those moments and reflect and share it with your parents and stuff like that too. They can get excited about, they can give you some excitement about having something published, and then they'll ask you like, wait, what, you had to pay to have the work published that you wrote? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And you're like, yeah, it totally doesn't make any sense.
Wait, let's not go too deep here, you know, like mom and dad, let's just celebrate this now.
Right? Don't ask any questions, okay? Let's just be happy.
Oh, great. What a good way to end this. I thank you for your time. And your dogs are still sleeping, as is mine. I don't know if basset hounds sleep between 16 and 22 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
he lives up to that. So, well,
Nice.
thank everyone for your time. I hope you enjoyed this. Next week, I believe we're doing literature reviews, and Laura Roman and hopefully Jason Grabowski will be on. Jason is giving a conference talk. He's going to try to escape afterwards and get on the call. That may or may not work, but we will have Laura on for sure. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekends. Get
Yeah,
out.
thanks for the great questions. That was really fun. And good luck, everyone.
Take care.
See you.